Hey, what's going on, guys? Jacob here, back again. Hope everyone is doing well. Back for another sort of music-themed video. I know the last one I kind of did was probably the album review end of the year thing I did, like, I guess coming up on a couple years ago now. Yikes! But it's okay. I was thinking about another game I could cover in the future, and perhaps I could still do that too, but I figured, you know what? I'd like to just encompass the whole media sphere into this channel, and whether I can use encompass as a verb or not, that is what I am currently doing with this video today. And this idea kind of just jumped out at me when I was just thinking about albums and music, and it seemed like an interesting idea, and I was trying to think, you know, when did I first really start getting into music? When did I, you know, kind of develop my own taste? You know, when did it start clicking with me of like, okay, I like this and I like this, and, you know, starting to curate genres and artists and albums that I enjoyed. And so I thought, what better way to go about it than to make a list? Because I love lists, and I also love Rate Your Music. So I decided to make this list right here. Let's bring it up. Music taste throughout the years. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the official like title of this list or not, but it sounded kind of cool, and, you know, just gets the point across. So here we are. And basically in the description here, I kind of set my rules for this list. It's very simple. I might end up expanding on this list and adding a few more entries to it, or maybe, you know, honorable mentions or something like that, but I think this video will serve that purpose, so that's what I'm here to do. So the rule I set for this list was to essentially choose one album per year that I got into music, essentially, that would serve as kind of the landmark or the milestone, or just the album that most described that year. And that was kind of a challenge to do, at least kind of at first. I'll get into it here, but just to set it up, I really started getting into music, I think, you know, probably start of the 2010s. You know, so I was probably like 13 maybe. I guess we'll see. So anything prior to the years I've listed, I could maybe get away with something that maybe I was hearing on the radio, or, you know, like a Pokemon Emerald soundtrack, but like that's about as far as we'd get. So I really wanted to start when I knew I was like, yeah, this thing, I like this thing, I'm gonna listen to this thing. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And the first year we're gonna start off with is 2009. Ooh, y'all remember 2009? You know, honestly, it was kind of hard for me to remember that 100%, because, again, I was like 12 or something, and getting into music, this album right here was the first thing that really stood out to me that I was like, ooh, yeah, I like this. So yeah, the album Meteora by Linkin Park, it's my first choice, and it's still honestly up there in like my top albums of all time. Obviously, I think because it is just such a prominent like record to me at the time, and really stood out. I think I had heard some Linkin Park like on the radio maybe. I'm not even 100% sure. Maybe I stumbled across a YouTube video, you know, like the public library. I know I shout out the public library a lot, like in my Challenge You video, because that's where I could really go on like YouTube and like listen to stuff, and, you know, I probably came across something like this. Regardless, though, I remember picking this CD up at Walmart. My mom took me, and I was like, yeah, I want this one. I'm not sure if I even knew like the Linkin Park discography, right, or that this was their second album. I think I was just like, you know, album art looks kind of neat, and I might have knew a song or two from it. I don't even know if I did. Regardless, I did not regret it at all. Like, I was blasting this like anywhere I could, you know, and I'm sure you'll see this is kind of a recurring pattern that, you know, young Jacob was into the nu metal kind of phase, and I can still say the atmosphere of Meteora is like prime material. Like the mix of electronica and like rock and rap, like there's a lot of kind of things coming together here that like just really stood out to me over like a lot of the other music I was hearing at the time. I don't know if I was paying as much attention to the lyrics per se, because it's very, you know, grungy, it's very angsty, and I don't know that I had a lot of that. And I feel like there's a lot of Linkin Park fans out there that are kind of like, yes, I was just a child going to school and I was having a great time, and then they're like listening to this, you know. It's like, yeah. I don't know, it's an interesting dichotomy, I suppose you could say, but regardless, that's 2009. We're going to move on now to 2010. And so 2010, I feel like, is really where I started, you know, delving a bit deeper into music taste. And I guess you could say I was still kind of in the nu metal phase, as we see here with Collide by Skillet. Now, one thing I did forget to mention, the years don't always coincide with the year that I'm choosing for the albums. Like, sometimes it'll line up, but for the most part, it's just what I was really listening to that year and what I was kind of getting into. But yeah, Collide by Skillet. Now, I had gotten into Skillet probably with their like 2009 like Alive album and Comatose, and I just started digging a little deeper. And when I found Collide, I was like, whoa! Like, it just hit so much harder. It was very raw. The energy was just like uncontained. You know, it was just like kind of in your face. And you know, do I like this album now? Yeah, it's cool, but I feel like I really resonated with it a lot more then, you know, and I mean, hey, shout out to Skillet, you know, I'm glad they're still doing stuff. This is like when I first got a laptop, got iTunes, like downloaded this thing, had an iPod at the time, like that, it was just so revolutionary that I was like, wow, I can have my own library of tunes and like just pick and choose kind of what I want. I'm like, that is amazing. And so that trend kind of continues into 2011, where I had a bit of a shift, and I'll explain this choice here right now. 2011, 4 times 4 equals 12 by Deadmau5. Yes, again. So 2010 was the album coming out. 11 was when I kind of discovered it. But it was an interesting kind of path, I feel like, from like the rock, nu metal to electronic, you know, pipeline. I believe, if I remember correctly, so Linkin Park had released 1,000 Suns, which was a bit of an experimental album for them. Like, people didn't really like it as much, maybe, as some of their previous work. Fair shout. I thought it was really neat. It was very interesting, and I remember I was looking at like their tour, like who they were going with, and I noticed Pendulum was another band that was touring with them. I'm like, okay, interesting. I looked them up, heard Watercolor. I was like blown away, and so from that I found Ghosts and Stuff, which Rob Swire features on, singer of Pendulum, and from there, yeah, I just listened to a whole bunch of Deadmau5. And 2011, I feel like is really when I just like listened to like all the Deadmau5 albums. Like, that's pretty much what I associate the year 2011 with, as well as just some kind of miscellaneous like electronic stuff, house tunes. Not to mention, this is kind of what got me into like producing like electronic music and really trying my hand at this kind of thing. And I mean, it was not very good. Maybe I'll show that at some point, but you know, prior to this, Linkin Park was kind of my inspiration, and I was really trying to make some of that kind of music, but that's a story for another day. Let's move on to 2012. Now, I know this isn't technically an album, it's like an EP, but I don't know. I feel like this set of EPs by Lamatre really defined this year. Like Relativity 1, 2, 3, and I mean any of their other songs really kind of fit the bill for 2012 and probably 2013. And I mean, my gosh, I just listened to them a lot after this, so it was kind of hard to pin down like 2012 because I feel like there was like a lot of electronic, a lot of dubstep kind of stuff too. But I don't know, something about these albums, or EPs rather, really stood out to me. And if you're not familiar with Lamatre, they make indie-tronica kind of stuff. Like, at least a lot of their early work, it had a very like DIY sound to it, which I don't know, it just really stood out to me. And you know, the way they did their vocals was really cool. I remember I played one of these songs for my mom once, and she was like, "Is that you?" I'm like, "I wish." So I guess I emulated it rather well, maybe. I mean, for being, I guess, what, 15 at this point? 13? I don't know. Either way, let's move on to 2013. Now, this was kind of a tough one. I actually had to start, like, researching a bit, like, looking at, like, my past Facebook posts, or just, like, what was I even listening to then? Like, I don't 100% know, but I remember seeing so many posts about Daft Punk. And I hadn't really fully gotten into them, like, with, like, a lot of their previous albums, but I really like Discovery, and by the time this came out, I was kind of aware of what they did. And so Random Access Memories, I feel like it was just like the prime album for that year. Like Get Lucky was on the radio, so I was already hearing that a ton. You know, some of my friends at school were into Daft Punk. Like, it just seemed like such a moment, and so it's kind of hard to choose, you know, much else. So let's keep on going here to 2014. Now this one, I almost like when I heard 2014, this album like immediately popped into my head. Worlds by Porter Robinson. Coincidentally, of course, now coming out on the same year as the the year that I'm like discussing here. But yeah, this album was just so inspirational, and I feel like for so many people in like the EDM scene, it was also very inspirational. There was a whole like worlds type beat kind of thing. I remember on SoundCloud, like everyone was kind of trying to do like the, you know, the Vocaloid, like sound font kind of, you know, style, like Sad Machine remix, like every 3 posts. Like it was a thing. It was like a movement. And I mean, man, I was also affected. Porter Robins, he's just such an inspirational dude. Like, I feel like everything he does, he's very, it hits deep, and I don't really, it's hard to explain, you know, it's just like one of the things you gotta listen to, and I think Worlds is definitely a product of its time. Like, I think it's still good now, yeah, but like, dog, like 10 years ago, this thing slapped. Like, there was like nothing really like it, I don't feel like. I mean, look at all these genres, like like what people have rated this as. Like, it's just there's a lot going on here, and it definitely inspired a lot of my production as well. And I think that will continue with 2015's choice of Adventure by Maddie. You know, it's kind of in the same vein of Worlds, honestly. Like Maddie and Porter, like, I mean, they made Shelter. They're like good friends, you know, and like I see them paired a lot just in music discussion. And so I feel like in a similar vein, you know, I was just really listening to this kind of electro pop kind of sound that I think Maddie did really well. Madeon, I can't remember. I think I just say Maddie now, but regardless, like, this album's still cool. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of lumping it with Worlds because it was in that same kind of, you know, era, I guess you could say. So let's keep moving on to 2016 with Nights by Pomrad. Now, this was the first album that really like struck me when I was like making this list, because prior to this, I don't think I had Spotify, and it was interesting. I was actually going on my Spotify, and the earliest I could go for like Wrapped years was 2016, and I was looking through it, and a lot of Pomrad was popping up, and I just like really remember what I was doing, like listening to this album. It's very just like, I don't even know what word you could use to describe it. Kind of atmospheric, very, very chill, but very wonky. But yeah, just very interesting electronic production on this thing. And I just remember, I think I had just gotten my first car. I was, you know, still at home going to community college, and you know, it was like every couple of days, every other day, whatever. And a lot of nights. I just especially remember nights. See what I did there? Like in the summer, especially, like coming home, like, you know, crossing over the lake, like, man. You know, and blaring some of this, just it was just such a mood, such a vibe. I try not to just throw vibe out there lightly, because I feel like it is a bit overused. But what else? I don't know what else to describe this other than a vibe and a half, maybe. I mean, that's a bit more than a vibe, I would say. So yeah, huge recommend if you haven't heard this album. I know it's a bit of a probably unknown compared to some of these other albums, but big recommend. All right, so we're going to move on to 2017, and here's an album that actually came out a couple years prior, but I don't think I really got into until later, and that's Purpose by Justin Bieber. Now, you might be surprised to see the Biebs himself on one of my lists, you know, of such taste. How could you have a generic pop artist? Okay, hold on now. All right, whoa, you know, oh, hey, okay. I know he made Baby, all right, but this was around the era, probably 2015 to 16, whatever, where people were kind of changing their mind, changing their attitude about Mr. Bieber here. For me, I think what did it is when he made a song with Skrillex, Where Are You Now? Like, that was like a moment. I was like two worlds colliding there. Like, excuse me, like this EDM dubstep dude I've been into is making like what? Like, what's going on? So Bieber's gotta be cool, you know? And that probably convinced me to check this album out. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this album. I know, yeah, there's some kind of corny moments on here, but like, come on. There's like Sorry, What Do You Mean, Where Are You Now, Company, like, and not to mention the bonus tracks on this thing are like absolute fire. I think it actually like enhances the regular album. I would actually recommend that one over the normal one, because they're some of his best stuff. So anyway, I don't mean to rave too hard on this album, but like it did like mean a lot to me, especially during 2017. I'm gonna stay on this year for a little bit here, because there was a lot of transition happening throughout this year. Like I legitimately went to 3 different colleges this year. I don't even know, like, you know, finishing up community college, kind of being in a relationship as well, and that kind of not really working out, me not really sure where I was gonna go. I went to one university and then said, nah, actually psych, and then went to another one, and then that's kind of, you know, 2017 was just a huge kind of like, I don't know, I'm figuring things how, and I don't know, something about like this album just helped me get through it. And I think there's a few others as well, like You're a Man Now Boy by Riley Ritchie. That was probably going to be one of my honorable mentions for that year, but well, I mean, it came out in 2016, but again, we're talking about the vibe of the year, the encompassing. I'm doing this again. I'm swimming. Sorry, I have a lot of energy right now, but I'm trying to get through this list, so let's keep going. So 2018, we're taking a different direction here, okay? This is when I was starting to get into a little bit more like hip-hop, kind of trap rap. Not to say this one is, but To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. I mean, I feel like it's kind of like an obvious choice for a lot of people. Like this album is legitimately like the #1 album of all time on Rate Your Music, so I don't think it's a hot take to have this in my list. But when I heard this, a lot of friends kind of like, told me about it, and I was like, okay, interesting. It's rare that I've really even heard anything like this album. Like it legit feels like I was like watching a movie or like listening to one. It's very cinematic. The flow, the pacing, just everything about it is. I mean, the message, like it's just so. I mean, there's a lot to it, and I'm not here to like review the album because plenty of people have done it at this point. But I feel like this like I was really going through Kendrick's discography and just a few other contemporaries like at this time, especially when I was making my like Tony Hawk like underground maps, like which maybe is a topic for another day, but I was loading up on albums and just kind of diving into some other stuff. So yeah, 2018 was pretty neat, first kind of college experience too, like university experience really got me into it. So let's move on to 2019. We're getting through it here with American Football by American Football. Yeah, I don't know if you would have seen that coming. Specifically their third record. I know a lot of people probably are more familiar with like their first one with like Never Meant. But this album to me was very, oh my gosh, I don't know, something about the soundscape, it was very dreamscape, really. You can see the genre tags, Midwest emo and dream pop. I mean, what a combination. But yeah, I mean, I've reviewed this album on the site already. I mean, so there's a lot to it, but I feel like for 2019, I don't know, there was a lot of like sentimental music I was listening to that year. Another runner-up, I think, maybe some like Ginger by Brockhampton, or Princess Catgirl by Cashmere Cat. Like, I don't know, just kind of a wide array of stuff a little bit. But it had a lot of like impact. I would also shout out Good Faith by Maddie on here because that was a big. There was a lot of music in 2019, but I don't know. I think I landed on this one just because I don't know. It just hits different. Hard to explain. But let's move on to 2020, the year of the pandemic. Ooh, oh man. I couldn't fully remember what I was listening to this year because honestly, 2020 was a blur. I'm sure a lot of you can agree on that. But I had just graduated college like in 2019, and just I was ready to kind of do some stuff, right? And that 2 or 3 months at the beginning of the year, I was looking for job opportunities, and then of course, yes, the world kind of shuts down, and I'm kind of left to my own devices here. Of course, I ended up making an album of my own, The Boulder. Pointing, but the Avalanches, the We Will Always Love You album, that one, it was a grower for me, but of course I had plenty of time to listen to it, and wow, it just really stood out as something it just seems so big, and I feel like it really helped me through that year because it felt like just kind of a corral of several different artists and people kind of coming together on an album. It's kind of similar to what the Avalanches have done in the past with like Since I Left You, that kind of thing, which is also a great album. But yeah, this one just really hit for me. So let's move on to 2021, and then we're almost done. 2021 had... Oh man, this was kind of a tough choice. There's actually a few contender albums for this year, but I ended up landing on Charm by DJ Sabrina. I mean, my goodness, man, it's legitimately like one of my favorite albums like ever. And again, it was. I had just moved out kind of at the beginning of that year, finally kind of getting on my own a little bit, and with first kind of major job, and it was just a lot of new stuff, and I feel like Charmed kind of got me through that, going from like Missouri to Kansas. There were a lot of long drives, and this album being like 3 hours long definitely helps with that. Not to mention, I ended up making a song with DJ Sabrina like at the end of 2021, which is just awesome. I mean, how often does that happen? Your favorite artist, So yeah, really cool. But I think some other honorable mentions, of course, Nurture by Porter Robinson, and the Brother Tiger album of Paradise Lost. Those two albums really got me through some of this year as well. So let's move on to the last year I have for now, and that is 2022. Now, this was kind of a tough year to like decide on what I was kind of into. And yes, there were a lot of releases from last year that I was listening to, but I actually found it was a year I went back a bit and listened to some older kind of, 90s, early 2000s electronic releases, like getting more into like the IDM kind of breakbeat kind of stuff. And Permutation by Amon Tobin, I think, actually really fit the bill. I just remember like going to the gym a lot and throwing this on and just really, really getting into it. Like the atmosphere of this thing is amazing. That's something I know I mentioned a lot, atmosphere, but like, I don't know, I think that's something I look for a lot of the time. But like something like this, like Aphex Twins albums, I was just really listening to like some of that stuff. And I really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, I don't know. This year, 2023, there's been a few contenders maybe, but I didn't really want to do it yet because, I mean, we're almost halfway through the year. Just about. Reminder. And I don't know. I'm not 100% sure of what, this year would, like, represent yet. I feel like it's one of those, like, I'll know next year what 2023 kind of was like, so we'll see. But I feel like it's interesting. I'm just looking through this kind of pipeline, and there's a lot of things that have changed, but I feel like at the same time, there's kind of not a lot of things, because I feel like there's some key elements to like all of these albums that like still kind of ring true with what I like and listen to today. And yeah, I'll probably just say atmosphere again. I think that's a very important element. But I think also just like the whole of an album, a lot of these kind of have that element to it. So I don't know. But yeah, I thought this was kind of a neat list to make. I just kind of threw this together. So I'm sure, again, there's like 100 other albums that could like, slide in place of any of these really. But again, the overarching like vibe or mood of the year, I think really these speak a lot more than I could even say with my own words. So I just wanted to show you all, and would absolutely be curious to know. I know it might be a lot to list out in the comments, but if there's an album that maybe you can think of from like a year that just really made that year, what would that be? Feel free to let me know. Maybe I've heard of it, maybe I haven't. Maybe it's better that I haven't, and then I could listen to it and gain a new perspective. That's always really fun. But yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to get this video to get like too long. But of course, if you enjoyed any of the music in the background, feel free to, find the link in the description, nameless warning. That's what I go by music wise. Checking out any of my stuff would always help. And of course, liking and subscribing to the video and, letting me know what content would you like to see next. Would you like to see a little more gaming content? Would you like to see more music related discussion similar to this? Would love to know, guys. But this has been Jacob, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.